And now that we're a family podcast.
All right. Well, Tilly, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today to speak to a couple of the books that you've written. Katie and I have very recently enjoyed your most recent books, My Dear Hemlock, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But for our listeners that don't know who you are, can you give us like in your own words, a quick bio, maybe on, who you are, where you live? Do you have children? Are you married? What is it that you do? What is your answer to those big questions?
Okay. Yeah. So I live in Middle Tennessee, about an hour and a half east of Nashville, in a tiny little town. It's actually the tiniest county in Tennessee. And my husband, I am married. My husband's a pastor. We've been married for about 12 years. And we have 4 kids, 9, 7, 5, and 18 months. So I know you guys have a busy life too. I don't know how many kids do y'all have?
So we've got number 6 coming in about a month.
What? No way are you pregnant. Can't tell at all from where I'm sitting, but it's all down there, I guess. That jacket. Yeah. Okay. So you understand the busy lifestyles of the big families. I grew up in a family. I was number 2 of 7 kids. So we like that big household. Yeah. So I worked as an editor of a newspaper for a couple of years, and that was right before I published my first book, and had my first baby also. So I sort of transitioned from full-time work when the first baby came, and have done a few different part-time-ish things since then. I've done mostly just writing on the side. But my first book was called Seeing Green, and it came out in 2017, I think. And then I have Broken Bread come out in 2020. And this most recent book just came out a couple months ago. So it's kind of the thing I do on the side. But we homeschool the kids. So that's mainly what I'm doing with a lot of my time.
I love it. It's so funny. We were over at, so this must be really recent then, because I was over at my in-laws, and we always are swapping books and saying,
fun.
So it was a big girls' time. And my sister-in-law was saying, I did not know I needed to read Seeing Green. She goes, it's about envy or jealousy, right?
Yeah, about envy.
Envy. And she was like, it's just totally not one of those books that I'd be like, oh, this is for me, but someone recommended it to her. So she read it and she's like, I would recommend this to anybody. And then she was reading My Dear Hemlock. And so I was like, I put it on my list to order. I ordered it. We came home from the road trip, and Canon Press had sent us My Dear Hemlock.
Nice.
And so it was already in the mail.
That's
and
great.
So anyways, it was really fun. It was kind of like a double recommendation there right away. And it was just such a joy to read. I love the screw tape letters. And so this, like the screw tape letters for women, is just phenomenal. Did you always know that you wanted to write a book with this bent? Your sense of humor in it is incredible.
Thanks.
But how did the idea kind of come to you to be like, oh, because I feel like a lot of people are like, the screw tape letters were written, right? I've never seen this spin on that style of writing.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're talking about was it your sister-in-law who didn't know the Seeing Green book would be helpful? A lot of people don't really want to read about envy because they're like, and it's also a totally ungiftable book. It's impossible to give that book to somebody. I feel like the screw tape idea was not something that was on the radar for a long time. It was probably in 2021 or 2022 that I wrote a couple of blog posts in this style. And it really started because I wanted to write about, I think the very first one that I wrote was the one about marrying down, like having the patient believe that she's married, below her. And it was literally just, I could not think, I wanted to write about this topic. I wanted to write about something I was kind of seeing and that I had even experienced to a degree. And I could not figure out how to write it as just a straight prose article. And because it's a weird thing to write about, like, hey ladies, how do you think about this? So it was really just a device that allowed me to approach things. And from there on out, I continued to just use it as a device to approach things that really needed to be fictionalized in order to have a good, I guess, illustrations. Like there's a lot of things you just need to fictionalize. You need to kind of create a fictional setting in order to approach them well. So it just allowed me to get in at some things that I didn't know another way to get in an approach. So I really liked it. And then it was fun. I mean, it was just fun, like to have this voice and to make to make these jokes. It turned into kind of a fun thing. So.
Yeah, from a reader's perspective, I do feel like that tactic works really well because it's very disarming, right? Your defenses go down a little bit. You get caught up in the story. And when you feel like something doesn't apply to you, you don't worry about it, right? You're kind of like, I'm just going to keep reading. Whereas when you're reading a nonfiction book that's, talking about virtues or vices or whatever, you instantly are saying, well, I don't struggle with that, or that's not me.
Right.
Or like, I know somebody that struggles with that. But when you're talking about the narrative of a fictional story, you get into the story, and then all of a sudden you're convicted. And you're like, wait a second. I think this is the Holy Spirit convicting me. And I know I experienced that in the Screw Tape Letters. And certainly, I mean, you said that this was like the female Screw Tape Letters, but I do feel like this is a very human book. It's a very mankind book. I love it that it's from the woman's perspective, but I found myself really enjoying it and being convicted, even as a man.
Great. That's good. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Well, the male, I have been interested because mostly my pre-reading friends have been women. So hearing men and how they've experienced the book has been really fun in a couple of interviews here recently. But my friend Greg Morse over at Desiring God, he has written a couple of these sort of imitation Screw Tape Letters. He does a really great job. I can't remember the name of his character, Glub something. But he does great with it, but he's the one who pointed out to me, there's an Emily Dickinson poem where she says, "Tell the truth, but tell it slant. The truth must dazzle gradually." So it's the idea of like fiction sneaks up on you from behind and opens your eyes to things that straight didactic writing isn't going to be able to do. The power of fiction. We all know the power of story. But when you take something that's really just didactic writing, I mean, it's just Christian living stuff, but turn it into fiction, it kind of borrows some of the power of narrative to do its work. So I really appreciated that.
Get a discount when you sign up for what?
The Growth Initiative and
the Get It All Done Club. The Get It All Done Club is a home management program. Linked down below, you could see a free masterclass about everything I teach on creating a peacefully productive home. And the Growth Initiative is
about becoming the man that you feel God has called you to be, but you don't have the systems and the support to become it.
So if you're looking to grow together this year as a couple, even if it's in two different veins, we encourage you to check out the link below. You'll find a discount to the couples package.
And if you want to learn more about either of these programs, you can watch a free webinar, a free webinar for either one of the courses.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really good. It was funny. Elisha started reading this before I did. And he would just I feel like it's rare when you read a book and then you read quotes to me while you're reading the book. He's like, oh, listen to this. You're going to love it. Because it's so many things that we talk about already. One thing that I thought was really good, you just put it so well, was we just did a podcast on this, and I think it's so timely. You put it in the Newlywed chapter, and you said, solidify the patient's belief that in order to praise anything about her husband, she must be in total approval of everything about him. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like so many of us women could do to read that chapter, as newlyweds, but then at any time in our marriage.
Right. That tune up and just praise. It's like you need the tune up, the praise tune up every month or two, just forget the power of it. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was a part that even resonated with me, because I don't know if it's just a human trait to think, well, if I show approval or if I give praise, they are going to take this and they're going to think that I'm in approval of everything that they're doing, and they're going to lose all motivation to continue improving themselves
That's
or
right.
serving me more.
Yeah.
And we put ourselves, you're really playing like, you're playing God in a lot of ways, because you're taking control of how they receive it and how they're applying it, versus just
Right.
being obedient to God, being like, oh, I'm the one that's supposed to be grateful when somebody does something worthy of being grateful for, being grateful to this one isolated thing. And then
Right.
and then you also mentioned in the book, it is bizarre how it is so challenging to be, I guess, to be nitpicky when you start having a heart of gratitude. You start with one thing, and then the next thing you know, you actually become grateful for the person
Yes.
you're showing thankfulness to. It's the same thing when you talk about praying for somebody. You're like, it's really hard to actually hold a grudge when you're wholeheartedly praying for them, versus I
right.
forget even how you break down the different ways you could pray for people. But I found that really to ring true in my own experience. And it's something that I think it just behooves us as Christians to be people of gratitude, most importantly to the people closest to us, namely, our spouse. So
that's right. Yeah. Like behavior, and our hearts and our feelings follow our behavior around, like on a leash, and what you do and what you say has so much power to affect how you feel about life and about people. And I think that's probably been one of the biggest things that the Lord has been working on in me the last couple of years, is just gratitude in general, like not just with the people in my life, but just everything in life. And what has He not given me? He's given me all things. And then to take that and turn that lens onto your kids and onto your spouse. This is a big thing in parenting too, this praising the one thing. Because it's so hard when you're a parent, you're trying to use carrots and sticks all the time. You're trying to discourage this bad behavior all the time. You're always having to deal with this behavior that you're trying to discourage. And you feel like, if you're going to be that parent who's just praising them all the time, where's their motivation, to change? But it's really such a misunderstanding of human nature to think that praise won't have positive effects, because it always does. So yeah, it's a big thing with parenting too. But it's funny because I think wives think that they're training their husbands, and so they're concerned about not giving them enough negative affirmation. I don't know. I really do think sometimes wives are really in like a makeover, job with they think that they're in this makeover situation with their husband. And yeah, it's a weird way to live.
So you're a pastor's wife. How long have you been a pastor's wife? And do you feel like that's given you, because I feel like you hit so many of these women's issues on the head, I guess. And it would make sense that you have more insight into women's issues, considering just like your role. Do you feel like that has kind of inspired a lot of the things that you wrote on here?
Yeah, I don't know if that's really true. Justin's been, let's see, he's been in maybe 8 or 10 years a pastor. I can't remember exactly, but I do think, it's possible I learn more things or hear more things or something as a pastor's wife, but so much of this stuff is just me, honestly. It's just like, I didn't know how to get into this stuff without, approaching it this other way. And part of that is because I didn't want to give too much of my own heart away in this book. It's just ordinary conversations with friends. Honestly, it's not any special, pastor's wife insight, I don't think so.
Yeah, well, I think you have really good insight into women, and not only what they struggle with, where our brains are going to go given a certain issue or certain temptation, but then also how to address it in a way that it could be received by a woman. Because you mentioned in here how we kind of have to be, we've gotten to a point in our culture where we have to be apologetic almost in giving advice.
Yeah.
So could you touch on that a little bit?
Just on that mentioned.
Yeah, on that
I think that was mentioned. Yeah, that was, I'm trying to remember which chapter that was in, because I feel like it was serving another point. It was about prayer. I think it was about prayer. Like the patient, she's a young Christian. She doesn't know how to pray. She would like to be mentored in just prayer. And that was super autobiographical. When I became a Christian, it was in 2010. And I moved out to the church that I'm now still in as sort of like a counseling case, like I was needing help. So I moved in this sort of needy situation. And then the women in the church really, like families hosted me. I got a lot of counseling from the pastors here, but I was learning a lot just about being a Christian woman from the women in the church. And one of the things that I learned in those 2 years was just how to pray, like basic Christian living stuff, like prayer. They do a Wednesday night prayer group at this church that we're in, and they have for 35, 40 years. And every woman prays every Wednesday night, in these groups. So as a baby Christian, it's a super scary and intimidating situation to be in, but it's how you learn to pray, like praying with other women, older, mature believers. So yeah, I think in that chapter, I was just saying like, she should be able to ask the older Christians in her life how to do these things or learn how to do these things. But we have the demon is saying we have things in such a state in the church now that women hesitate to give each other advice of any kind because we're all supposed to be just these like broken, limping Christians, or even just in normal things like how to mop your floor. Like any advice that's given means you're setting yourself up as some kind of superior is the way we look at it, I think. And so the idea that another woman is telling her, here's what normal Christian life is like. You read the Bible on a regular basis. You pray on a rate like this is what normal Christians everywhere have done for thousands of years. But in order for even an older woman to say that to a younger woman, it means that older woman has to be doing those things, and it's implied. So it's like, is it prideful to be telling other women about the Christian disciplines? So yeah, the demon is saying like we have things set up in such a way that women hesitate to advise. Mm-hmm. And how much is lost in that? How much is lost?
Yeah, I know that this is certainly the case. I feel like with men too, where if any encouragement or exhortation or advice is going to be given, it's usually the preface is like, "Hey, I struggle too. I'm a nobody. Right. I don't even know if this is an issue you have, but perhaps potentially in some situation, maybe I've done it well before, but it wasn't my deal." You do it like that, and then you get to this little bit like, but maybe you could try this. And I think it was I've heard it talked about just kind of like that worshiping of empathy, just kind of like, hey, we need to empathize with people rather than like what you just said, calling people up to just kind of like, hey, this is just matter of fact. I'm curious, and sorry, were you going to say something?
No.
Well, and again, I don't want to spend too much on this point because I know, like what you said, it was a passing thought, and when you were making a bigger point. But what are some things that you could actually encourage, women or just Christians in general? Because if you find yourself in an environment or in a culture where you're like, man, there aren't older women that I can look to and really admire, and so it is hard receiving any type of instruction or advice from them. And so they kind of have that guard, just kind of like, well, no, nobody around me is really doing it in that admirable of a way. I mean, that might be a false perception, but what would you say to that?
Well, I guess two things. One, I would just say that I think sometimes we can be a little too picky about how we glean valuable things. Like I think that sometimes we're not looking hard enough. We're not chewing our food enough to get everything that might be out of it. We're not chewing the people around us long enough to get everything they've got. I just think I could look at a lot of the older women even that I know and be like, what am I gonna go ask her about? There's always something. Like she knows more about something than I do. Everyone I meet is like that. Everyone you meet knows more about something than you do. So get more curious, I think, and get more, maybe even more bold just in asking. So I think that would be my first piece is like, most likely there is someone in your life who is more spiritually mature than you are. You can get something out of them. It's just like listening to a pastor preach in the pulpit and be like, you can be real picky about your preaching sometimes. And like, you can go online and hear the best preachers in the world. Why would you sit and listen to this guy in your local church? And I do think it's a failure of I think sometimes it's just a failure of appetite in the person who's listening. So that's number one. Number two, I have seen people move from one town to another in order to be in a church that has a healthier community, a healthier, body of mature believers. I think it's the kind of thing you move for. I've seen many people do it. A lot of people move from a big city to a little town, even for churches like our little dinky church. It's like if you find a thing that you think this is a good thing, you prioritize it. You move your life around to make it possible to get in there with mature, growing Christians, another body of believers. So I don't know. Those are my two kind of opposing pieces of advice, but you see how they fit together, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, honestly, that's something that you did a great job of in the book too, is showing that, hey, there's two ditches here on either side. Women are going to lean one way or the other. Just get her in a ditch. It doesn't matter which side it's on. When you speak even in that prayer chapter on prayer and the Holy Spirit, is almost in opposition instead of working harmoniously with scripture and the study of God's word. It's like, okay, she's probably leaning one way or the other. And so we can leverage that from a tempter's standpoint. And I just think that's really cool because it's acknowledging that you have to use wisdom to be like, okay, in which way am I failing here, or do I need to grow here? Because it's going to be different for different families and different women, and
that's right.
But we can all grow.
That's right.
Yeah, something I'm curious of. Well, actually, do you have another question about this book? Because I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Question. Okay, sorry. Go for it, Katie. I don't want to cut you off.
No. I love this chapter on the dangerous household. I thought that was so good because this is something that it's so easy to fall into. Is you talk about these strongholds, these households that are living in line with God's order. But then you also say here, confuse, the patient here, making her suspect that the aroma in these homes arises out of peripheral comforts she could never imitate. Could you speak to that chapter a little bit?
Yes.
I think this is a really big thing in our homes when we're trying to homemake and try to create an environment that is Christ-centered and, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So this is just such a big thing about women. I think it's one of our big strengths, but it comes with some liabilities, is that we're so environmental. Like we're so much about the environment of where we are and like, what is the place in which we are doing the thing that we're doing? Or even our bodies, like our bodies are this environment, and it needs to be perfect in order for anything good to happen in that space. And I just think it can be really easy for me, and I think others too, to imagine when we go into a home that is really operating well, like they're in step with what they're supposed to be doing. They're meeting people where they are, and they're drawing people in, and they're training children, and just doing all these wonderful things in a home. If they happen to be doing that stuff in a house that we can't afford, or in a space that is not like our space, I think as women, we can come away and start being like, we can't really do a Bible study like that because we don't have the living room that they have, or, I can't be having people over like they are doing because look at our kitchen, cabinets with the doors off or whatever it is. There's just always something that you're like, this environmental thing is standing between me and becoming what I want to become, which is this, and this may be this example even that I'm looking at of another family. And in this letter, the demon is saying like, basically make this into an excuse so that she doesn't take anything home to her little apartment and take responsibility for it in the form of course, like, well, of course she's honoring her husband. He makes so much money. Or of course, they are keeping, she's having a joyful time with her kids. Look how many bedrooms they have, just things like that. So
it's really easy to excuse away someone else's success in a certain area.
Right.
I think we also do this, you mentioned the physical environment too. I think it's really easy to do that with someone else in a better state of health or something like that. Well, of course she's joyful and happy. She's gorgeous, or, she's not pregnant, or she's, all these different things, instead of like, now what can I take away? Yes, we can't recreate the exact environment in that home. Probably that wasn't what God was calling us to in the first place. But, like I said, there are things that we can always take home. And I love how you said earlier, there are things we can take home from every single person. Or there's something we can learn from every single person. So we just need to stop being so picky. I love that.
Yeah, both Katie and I thought of we started saying this thing like 5 years ago, and it's funny that we're actually building a house now, but we started saying 5 years ago, we need to be our dream home, not build our dream home. And so because we, like many people, wanted to have a particular home on a particular property, and we thought that would solve all of our problems. But when we really wrote down all the things we were looking forward to the most about this space, most of the things were actually very much controlled by our attitudes and by the effort we were putting into our marriage and into our parenting and into our local community. And you hit so many things that I think are the games that we play in our own head, that you say, well, of course they're able to be so hospitable. Look, even money, like the finances that they have for the hospitality, the space that they have for the hospitality, or even his work schedule is more. My husband works this schedule. There's no way we could do a consistent home group and you start going through all those circumstantial things rather than looking at the admirable traits of that thing that you admire and saying, well, we can actually recreate that in our own way. And that's where you actually get creative. And that's, in my mind, where you actually see innovation in the church. It's pursuing the same virtues and the same type of and the same fruits, but it's going to be expressed differently because of our difference in circumstances and the difference that we have in logistical life. And I think that's a good thing.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, are you going to let me change topics? Or
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, something that I was thinking of, because we just recently did a podcast on women working outside the home, inside the home, doing work in addition to what some might consider just homemaking.
I think that's the one episode. I just found your podcast, but I listened to one episode yesterday. It was that episode, and I wanted to talk to you about it. I don't want to steal this episode, and go back to that one, but I really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Well,
I'd like to talk more about it.
Great. Well, something that I had, you already mentioned, we can glean from everyone. And I do think it is helpful sometimes to kind of hear how people are going about what they're doing. Clearly, you're like you said, you're a homeschooled mother, you're married to a pastor, and yet you're putting out amazing content, right? You're putting out this great, encouraging, edifying work that the whole church, the global church is benefiting from. And so can you kind of maybe walk us through, not necessarily like a day in the life, but more generally how you're able to kind of structure your life so that you are able to invest, wholeheartedly into your children, into your husband, into your home, because clearly you prioritize those things and see them as the high calling that God calls them as. But then you also find joy and passion and fulfillment in these the gifts of writing. So can you kind of walk us through what that walk looks like?
That's great. Great question. And this is exactly what I want to talk to you guys about, because I loved the approach in that episode. I love that you guys are entrepreneurs. I definitely want to hear more about this when we're done recording. I have a lot of questions, but just the idea of, you were talking about women's having this sort of boredom in early childhood, which I definitely experienced, that feeling of like, counting down the clock and all that stuff. And I have to say, like, it's never a settled thing of how are we going to fit these things in. And it's an ongoing conversation with Justin, my husband, because like even so I'm from an entrepreneurial kind of family. Like my dad was starting businesses all the time. He was in Christian music in Nashville, and then he did a bunch of other stuff. So that bug I was kind of bitten by that bug. It was the kind of thing that me and my siblings were always talking about and doing. And, since we've been married, I've had a lot of ideas that I have thrown at Justin for things we can do. And some of them, I don't even remember what they are anymore because they never happened. But like last year, we joined up with some friends and opened a coffee shop in our local town to kind of serve the community there in the town. And honestly, if I could do it over, if I knew how much work it was going to be, I don't think I would have done it. If I could go back, like it was very, very deeply distracting to me while I was getting that going. It's now being run by our dear friend who's in the church also and is single, and it's her full-time job. Sorry. But like, I think it was not even a few months ago, I was pitching an idea to Justin about, hey, I'd been researching this Amazon FBO. What is it called? FBO, is that a thing?
Fulfilled by FBA.
I'm going to create. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to create products for Amazon. And he looks at me and he's just like, no, like, no, you're not. What are you talking about? Like, I guess it's still just a conversation between us where he has multiple times redirected me and said, if you're going to do anything outside of just this home and hospitality, it's writing is really the only thing that you need to be giving any extra time to, because it's the thing that you are actually good at doing. Like starting businesses, you don't really have a lot of experience with that. I don't think that's a good use of your time. So it's nice to have him as sort of this filter. The same thing with our podcast. We've had that podcast that was kind of seasonal. It's like maybe 15 episodes a season, once a year. Last year, I did not participate because it was just too busy. I had a baby. We were starting the coffee shop. So it was just me saying to my partner in that podcast, you go ahead and do a season without me this year. If you'd like to do it, go ahead and do it. It didn't make the cut, basically. And I loved what you had to say about social media and just how I have found social media to be a thing that I just cannot do. Like I can't be a content. Even when I'm putting books out, I'll do interviews. I might, I have my little Facebook with local friends that I'm interacting with local friends. But as far as like being a social media content creator, I found that it was not a thing that I could do and be godly at the same time. Like it was too distracting with my little kids. You were talking about filming your children for content. And it was never a professional thing for me, but I just found even with my little private account, filming my toddlers, I could not keep my mind in my life. Like I couldn't keep my children's, well-being at the forefront of my mind because I was filming them, So those are the choices I feel like in this day that every mom is really having to make. You're having to make choices about where to spend your time and your attention. Even almost as, about as important. Your time and your attention are precious commodities, and they belong first and foremost to your husband and to your children. And you just have to know when something is stealing that time away. So I really appreciate everything y'all had to say in that episode about that. I definitely picked up some things, some ways of prioritizing. But as far as like writing a book, like books can be written at 3 a.m. And several of mine have been, partially written at 3 a.m. Lots of reading happens in homeschooling. A lot of the reading that I do is changing a little bit, but I'm reading more history than I've ever read in my life because, I'm teaching American history to little kids. So, the reading is for me that, a book is not going to come unless you're reading a lot of great material. So, I'm a lifelong reader, and I always have been. And as far as me writing another book, it may be a while because, we're in another season. The last books came out in an earlier season in parenting. So, I don't know. I know there's no definitive answer in there, but just the answer is it's hard, but you have to make choices. And that means letting go of certain things.
Well, I think what you're saying there is so profound, which is there is no definitive answer. It is in motherhood, having extracurricular, for lack of a better word, things to do are seasonal. And that's just the way it's going to be. It's not like we can check this box and be like, okay, well, this works for my family now and here on out.
Forever.
And I think,
that's right.
Yeah, we always have to have it available on the chopping block to be like, well, I'm not going to go there with my kids or my husband. They're the non-negotiables. And so I always have to have open hands with these other things that I do. You even talk about in your book, the mirrors in our pockets, right? As our phones and how they just steal us from time, which is our creator wants us to be present in time. And you compare that with gardening later on and saying, oh, I lose track of time in the garden, and being like, they're totally different things, because yes, you lost track of time in the garden, but you're present for every moment of that time. How different is that? And we've gotten to experience that the last few years. Just those different things, like losing yourself in an activity that's filling your soul versus one that's just sucking it dry, you know?
Yeah. I mean, even you said keeping your mind where you're in your life. That's like, that sounds like obvious. And yet that's actually a challenge this day and age. Keep your mind in your life. Going back to that time thing of being present, I do think that is a portion of the Screw Tape Letters, is it not? When C.S. Lewis is talking about keeping their thoughts either in the future where anxiety and fear come from, or in the past where guilt and regret, stem. But when you're in the present, and then when you're thinking on eternity, those are the moments where you actually get to encounter. Actually, I'm not even going to try to reiterate what the point was. I'm saying that
like eternity.
Yeah, the most like eternity.
Yeah.
But then taking that mindset into the home, I think is really crucial, although it is challenging. And I want to say one more thing. Sorry, I'm talking a lot here. I think it's so cool that even the conversation with your husband is saying, well, hey, you want to be pouring into your marriage and into your children, but by viewing writing as a gift, your husband being like, hey, if you're going to put, extra time into something, you're really good at this thing already. And so, to do moonlight doing this, and how flipped that is, I think, in our modern culture. If you go into marriage with a skill set, if you're a writer, or if you're a musician, or a teacher, a lawyer, a medical professional, that takes precedence. You're like, this is primary, and everything else is going to, could be secondary. What was that journey like for you? And as far as that identity piece, because everybody was like to say, well, you're a writer first and foremost, and you're kind of like, well, even in your own words, you're like, well, that's actually not the case, and that's not how you and your husband talk. So, what was that journey like for you?
Yeah. So I had that editing job when we were just getting married, and before we got married, and for a little while afterwards. It's a tiny little newspaper in the county up above us. So it was like me and a staff of maybe 3 or 4 people, part-time writers. And that was when the writing got really good. Honestly, I was writing so much material to fill a newspaper. I mean, I was doing so much of the writing every week in that newspaper. So many, many thousands of words every week. And out of that, probably I feel like the best prose I may ever write was that first book, because I was so warm from all that writing. But I could not wait to quit that job and go home and get pregnant. Like, I was so excited to not be doing that anymore. And maybe that's just because those were my expectations growing up. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I was homeschooled. So I had a lot of friends in college who were extremely ambitious professionally, but all I ever really wanted to do was have a home and write. Those were the only 2 things. So I think the first time I ever realized, oh, wow, I really am going to have to give up something in order to raise these kids, was after the first book got published. And I realized, okay, this is the first. I've had many jobs, doing all kinds of crazy different things, but I had never loved my work before. And when I published that first book, I realized, oh, I really love doing this work, and I am not going to be able to just sit and do this work all day, every day, or, as much as I want to. Basically, like, you are actually going to have to give something up that you want to do in order to teach your kids, especially when they hit school age. And that was a moment for me. It was definitely a moment of like, okay, this is what I want to do. Like, these kids, this is what I want to do. This is the most important thing. You can put this on ice and it's okay. Like, it's going to be all right. And it's just interesting how still I've managed to steal time and do a few things here and there, but there's still moments like that where I'm like, okay, you can't do this thing. So I think it is when the kid, I think you mentioned this experience that your kids getting older, they get so interesting and they get so fun. Homeschooling is so engaging. Like, I just had no idea when I had the little toddler and baby at home and nobody else. I had no idea that there would be days that Justin gets home for supper and I look up and I'm like, where did the time go? Like in the garden, that I was present for every moment, but every moment passed so quickly and every single moment was accounted for. Also, there was something productive happening every minute of today, and yet it was good work and it was pleasant work. And it's a challenge. It's the kind of challenge that, you were made for this challenge,
I love that. I also love earlier how, at least Elisha's not the only person who has to shut down some of his wife's ideas.
Yeah.
He's always bombarded with like, where did you get that? And why did you think that was a good idea?
I thought of that at 2 a.m. last night. What were you doing?
We need to do it. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you talking about that moment, where you experienced the true, like, this is an actual I'm actually giving something up. And I think it's actually really inspirational. It's encouraging to hear, because there obviously was a hierarchy in your convictions and what you felt like the Lord has ordained things to be, the way he's ordained things to be. But then also you didn't let that be an excuse. A lot of times perfectionism keeps us from doing anything that we thought we were really good at or that we really enjoyed doing. And so, unless you're able to put in your 50 or 60 hours a week towards this discipline, you're not going to do it at all. And again, just not to beat this horse even more dead, if that's what we're doing, but was that something that you had to get over to, this element of perfectionism? Because I think artists or writers, there can be this element of like, no, I really need to get ensconced in the moment in order to create the product that I want. And parenthood, motherhood does not facilitate that at all. So what's that been like as far as being a writer? And I'm sure people could just apply that to any kind of like moonlighting or any side hustle where it's like, hey, you fit this into the cracks. So what was that like for you?
That's right. Yeah. Like turning on the sort of writing mind, and then turning it back off again when that, how much 2 hours that you had or hour and a half that you had is up. I feel like the Hemlock project was very humbling for me, honestly. And I know that's strange to say because the editor was so good that I feel like the book is in good shape now. But when I turned that manuscript in, it was a month before my baby was due. So it was a while ago. It's been a while. The editing process has been long on this one. But when I turned that first book in, the Seeing Green book, I had started it and laid it down and worked on it and edited it myself for maybe 4 years before I got an agent and suddenly it got published. But I couldn't get it published for a long time. So I had a long time to perfect that work. And when I turned it in, I think they changed like 5 words and it went to print. Like it was so close to done, So I was, I felt good about turning that in. And I had one baby when that manuscript went in. So this book I turned in, I asked them for an extension because I was like, I got pregnancy brain. Can I please not be done with this book in time? And they said, no, why don't you meet your deadline? And so I did because, it wouldn't have helped to wait until I had a newborn. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was having that feeling of just like, this is not going to be good work. Like this is scattered. There's all these different subjects. It was just an extremely messy manuscript when I turned it in. It needed a lot of work. And thankfully, the editor that they used at Canon was awesome. Ethan at Canon, shout out to you because he was exactly the incisive mind that was needed to clean this thing up. But it was embarrassing for me to have someone else do that much editing or, see that work in the state that it was in when I turned it in. And I just had to be like, you know what? It is what we're just doing the best we can here. So you just do what you can. And I found there's a lot of old things that I used to do before I had, I used to paint a lot. I used to, when I was real young, a teenager, I used to do a lot of oil painting. And now I paint with my kids, and no, it's not anything special that we're doing, but I'm still painting and it's still fun. And like I used to be a big exercise person. I'm obviously not doing that much of that anymore, but I'm doing what I can and I'm doing it with kids and it's enriching to all of us, That's a side note on writing. Most anything good I've ever written started on a walk through the hills of Tennessee. So walking with a baby in a stroller even is how most ideas I will have an article nearly finished in my mind before I ever sit down. Sometimes if I'm getting a lot of walking in that season. So anyway, you do what you can. You steal it here and there.
I love that. Like Elisha said, just not having that perfectionistic mindset and allowing things to still bless your life that are hobbies, and work your children into things that you used to enjoy, enjoying new things now, like homeschooling with children, gaining new interests, being open to getting new appetites. And then, I really admire that, because I know of so many women who have desires to do certain things, but it's like, well, I can't, sit down uninterrupted for large chunks of time. And you really can't as a mother. And so you have to be okay with that start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. But there could still be so much blessing by adding these enriching things to your life, even with the starting and stopping. And even like you said, they're starting and stopping with, with the podcast, or like for large seasons of time too. It's not just like during one day where you have to turn your brain on and off. It could be like, I've got to say no to this for 3 months or 6 months or whatever the case may be. And it can be hard to make those calls. So that's encouraging to see, I guess, how much you've been able to do while keeping the hierarchy of the things that you value.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Tilly, can you tell us where people can find your books? And also, this is great because I'm pretty sure by the time we get this episode up, this is going to give people ample time to get these books ordered for Christmas gifts. So this is actually going to work out really, really well.
You can gift this book very easily.
Yeah, exactly.
My dear Hemlock.
Yeah, you can sneak in the Seeing Green into you can get all your books,
Yeah, that's right. As long as you don't give them Seeing Green by itself, right? Because they won't know what you mean by it.
I know. I need to get that next.
Yeah, but can you share where people can find your books? Again, you kind of hinted earlier, maybe the podcast is still existing.
Yeah,
can people be looking out for that?
Yeah, we might make it because Canon is offered to have us sort of put out that podcast via their channel or whatever, which just means that we don't have to edit it or figure out about editing or pay for it, whatever. We don't have to mess with any of that. We can just record when we can. So, and we've got a deal where me and Abigail are not going to interview the same person together, because you don't need two people well, you guys are doing great together because you got the male and female voice, but when me and Abigail do it, it just it's not as, I think it works great with one person. So, ways of making it where neither of us are spending that as much time, I guess, on the podcast. So my books are both Seeing Green was acquired by Canon this year. So they put it out again with a new cover, which I really like. And they let me read the audiobook, which I wasn't able to do last time. My previous publisher had hired that out. So I got to read my own books this time. I really enjoyed it. I got to read the Hemlock book, which is a real challenge, as you can imagine. Wow. I had to it's like some acting chops or something was needed for that. But the Broken Bread book is out of print. So it cannot be acquired this Christmas. It's not available. But there's a rumor that maybe Canon is going to grab that book as well, which means then it would be available again. So
okay,
so keep your Canon subscription live.
Yeah. Okay.
Right,
so are the audio versions of your book, do you know if they're part of the Canon Plus subscription?
The Seeing Green is out with the Canon Plus.
Nice.
Hemlock is not out yet.
Okay.
But it will be there. That's where it will be. So.
And then they get the physical copies at canonpress.com.
Yes, you can get them there. You can get them on Amazon.
On Amazon.
I'd probably prefer you to buy it from them. I'm sure it's cheaper or something.
Something, yeah. Yeah, they do seem to get here quickly when I go through Canon.
They do.
Which is, nice. We don't live far away, but
where are you guys?
We're up in North Idaho. We're north of Coeur d'Alene. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're like 7 hours south, same state.
Or no, it's like 2.5 hours.
Oh, you're right, because they're down in Boise.
No,
they're in Moscow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Anyways, wow, Tilly, thank you so much for just giving us time here, for encouraging us, and for all the work that you've done. We'll link where everybody can find your books, and we encourage everyone to get those for themselves and for their friends this upcoming holiday season. So blessings to you, Tilly, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.